All right, good evening, everybody. I hate to interrupt all these great conversations, but we're going to have more great conversations, so I'll ask everyone to take their seat. So good evening again. My name is Jamie Swain. I'm president and CEO of VPM, and welcome to Sesame Street. That's always a lot of fun to say. So we are really honored to be able to have these conversations tonight, these civic action conversations. In fact, this is the first in-person convening that we've had since we began these in 2022. So again, I want to thank you all for making time to join us this evening. I understand it's pouring down rain outside, so those who are, you all got here in nice weather, so way to be early. That's always great. So again, these conversations started in 2022 as a way to bring people together to talk about the most critical regional priorities. And I think importantly, not just talk about them, but look for solutions as we think about how do we create a region that has upward economic mobility for everyone. And I want to thank our partners in this work, the Community Foundation for a Greater Richmond, Plan RVA, Chamber RVA, the University of Richmond Bonner Center for Civic Engagement, and the VCU Center for Community Engagement and Impact. There has been a lot of great work happening from the leadership of these organizations to create an economic mobility framework. This is incredibly exciting and impactful work, and we're really proud to be part of that movement. So some of you may not know much about VPM. It was talking to some of our panelists. People walked in, they're like, wow, I didn't know all this was going on. You may know us as your PBS and NPR station, but we are much more than that. In fact, it's wonderful to have you all here, but you may know that we are bound for downtown. So we start construction on Broad Street at our new location in August. You are the first to hear that publicly. Thank you. Where we hope to do more convenings like this right there on Broad Street. But again, you may know us as your PBS and NPR station, but we're much more than that. We are truly your community voice. We tell and share stories about the issues that impact people here in Central Virginia, really providing deeper context on the issues that are facing all of us and highlighting those voices that are not often heard. And tonight's topic on affordable housing is one that we've actually covered in depth, from our journalists at VPM News to our documentarians to our very brand new podcast. If you've not heard it, it's called RVA's Got Issues. Great name, with Rich Maher. And in fact, the first episode was about affordable housing, and Javon Burton, thank you for joining us. There you are. Javon, thank you for joining us on that episode. So I can encourage you after here, go back, download RVA's Got Issues where you can hear about that. And I think, again, what we're trying to do is not just help the community understand the complexity of these issues. They are certainly complex. But how do we put a human face on it as well? This is not just about data or numbers or the issues themselves. These affect people. Housing affects all of us, and it affects the people in a community. So what I want to show you right now to set up the conversation is a clip that strings together the voices of the community from three of our series. So the first one is from Life in the Heartland. Life in the Heartland is a series about issues in rural communities and people coming together to create solutions to those unique challenges in rural communities. The second one is from a documentary we did called Heard, which looks at people living in public housing in Richmond, and it's really first-person account. And then Focal Point, which is our news magazine series, which again has covered housing really, really deeply. So with that, let's roll the clip.
If you don't have housing, it's hard to get a job. You don't have a place to take a shower, get dressed, or keep your stuff.
The house got sold from under us.
I didn't talk to very many people about staying in my car.
All of this, we're just trying to build our family.
We are experiencing a housing market failure.
I literally was on the phone crying my eyes out about it. Like, it feels like everything is against us.
Out here, you're gonna learn fast and you're gonna grow up fast.
This was home. Every level in life that you grow is something that you have to defeat.
Come on, y'all, line it up.
We call the unexpecteds because people just don't expect us to get far in life. People just don't expect kids from the projects to make it out.
What up, baby?
We don't really get an outlet to really tell our story so people can really hear us.
You got it now.
They want somebody to listen because they just want to be heard.
I thought I was going to be stuck in public housing for a very long time.
It's easy to just give gift cards or food here and there, but they actually invested in me as a person so that I could become self-sustainable. So now that I'm in a place where I can actually provide for me and my children, they actually put me in a place where I actually obtain employment. There have been plenty of times when me and my children, when we're walking into the house, we may stop right before we walk down the path and just look at each other and be like, can you believe we live here?
So I think that last comment is so powerful. Like, I can't believe we live here. I think everybody who has joined us this evening knows how fundamental housing is to economic mobility. And again, I'm pleased to see so many of you here to talk about this particular issue. And we're going to get right to the plan, but before I do, I just want to thank some of the people who worked so hard to put this event together. Martha Schickel from Plan RVA, many of you know, is not able to be here tonight, but she brought together our speaker and our panelists, so I just wanted to note her contributions. And our producers from the event, Gail Cavallaro and Bailey Bush from the Community Foundation. Will you raise your hands? Where are you? In the back there. All right, thank you. And Mary Arrett from VPM, who's done quite a bit of work. Many of you know Mary. She's probably helping people make her way in. Oh, there's Mary in the back. Thank you. And to the VPM team, they did a wonderful job setting up a lovely vibe and just an opportunity for us to host you here. We're really proud, and we would love to bring you all together again. I think these conversations, coming together, convening, and having dialogue and talking about solutions is what's going to move us forward. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator this evening, Erica Coffey. Erica is an educator with 20 years of experience. She is a trained facilitator and cares deeply about getting to the root of the problem. As a diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging consultant, she focuses on having the right conversations that lead to sustainable solutions, exactly what we want to do tonight. So please join me in welcoming Erica Coffey.
Thank you, Jamie. And excuse me, these glasses aren't meant for walking and reading, so we're going to get this all figured out. So welcome, everyone. You came in the sun or the rain. Thank you for being here tonight. As Jamie said, this is our first in-person session. So please provide grace if things seem a little bumpy. It's because they are, and we know it, but it'll be fixed for the next community conversation, okay? So I'll be your moderator. Thank you to VPM for hosting us this evening and for recording tonight's event. Yes, it will be recorded. You just heard that, okay. This series is brought to you by RVA Engage. RVA Engage is a collaboration of community engagement professionals in the nonprofit, corporate, government, and educational sectors. They seek to inform and catalyze community members to engage in the issues that most impact our region. Next slide. The Civic Action Conversation series focuses on critical regional priorities and possible action steps for engagement. The theme of this year's conversation is, what does it take to create upward economic mobility for all? The topics of these series were chosen because they reflect some of the highest priorities we see in our community and directly impact economic mobility. Tonight, we'll hear from experts who are working every day to make housing affordability accessible to all. We invite you to listen, learn, share your input, and take action in a way that makes sense for you. Okay, we have a packed agenda, and with the rain, we got started a little bit late, but we are going to do our best to stay on time schedule. Our speaker will set the foundation for our discussion this evening. We will then have a panel discussion to dive deeper into affordable housing, followed by Q&A. After, we will hear about a regional framework project that is a collective action initiative focused on creating economic mobility. We will then have table discussions and hear from you. Have more time for Q&A, and we'll wrap up with a review of possible action steps. All right, and a few housekeeping items. This is how you're going to ask your questions. So if you look in front of you, you will see index cards. We will accept questions through index cards, and they will be collected throughout the session. Questions will be answered during Q&A portions of the program, and we will send a post-email with the answer to questions we were not able to address in tonight's session. We are recording tonight's event, and we'll post it and the resources on rvaengage.org as soon as it is available. We will send all registered attendees an email to alert you when it is available, and restrooms are through the back doors. Okay, with that, I have the pleasure of introducing you all to Javon Burton. Javon Burton is the Executive Director for the Partnership for Housing Affordability, a nonprofit focused on creating greater access to housing opportunity through policy, research, and collaboration. In this role, Mr. Burton works with local governments, developers, community groups, and key stakeholders to advance housing policy and educate decision makers on the region's needs. Let's welcome Javon.
Thank you. Good evening. As Erica said, Javon Burton with the Partnership for Housing Affordability. And the role of my remarks tonight are to provide a foundation for the conversation that we'll have. So we'll be brief. We'll try to be heavy on the graphics that we have just to really help illustrate what the need looks like across the region. And again, to emphasize the point that this is a regional issue that requires collaboration and conversations just like this in order to make significant progress. So it's no secret that housing is in the news just about every day, whether that's national news, local news, regional or state. I think it's like every week there's a new ranking on this city does this better or this city's worse for this. But I think the broader point is that housing is being talked about more than it really ever has. And hopefully it's more than just a moment, and hopefully we can take advantage of it and leverage that into systems change. So our role in the Richmond community is to help educate local governments and other stakeholders on how we can address this and also what the needs look like in their communities. So here in Richmond, it's no secret we're growing. We'll have about 1.3 million residents in the next few decades. And a lot of that growth has been driven by domestic migration, so people moving here from other states or surrounding areas to take advantage of Richmond's competitive advantage, which is our cost of living. So a great example of that. In 2021, we saw the percentage of domestic migration increase considerably into Richmond, and a lot of that was driven by remote work. With more people working remotely, why pay for more expensive rent in another area when you could move to Richmond and take advantage of lower housing costs and still have a higher salary than people that are living here. What that's done, though, is contributed to the competitive nature of our housing market, driven up demand, which has led to some of the price increases that we've seen. So you'll see that on homeownership, we have considerable increases across the board. In the city of Richmond, over 80%. And this is just kind of taking a 5-year snapshot of what home prices have done in some of our major jurisdictions. But these are significant price increases that have made home ownership much more unattainable for first-time home buyers. Now, this one is a little bit more difficult to look at, so I'll kind of walk you through it. But along the bottom, these are some of the major job occupations within our region. So everything from lawyers and management to people in our food service industry, retail workers, office workers, tellers, whoever. And the purple bars across the middle of the screen, they represent the income that you need to afford the median home value in Henrico, the city of Richmond, and Chesterfield. So this is in 2017. Most occupations, it was well within reach in order to afford the median home value. Now, if you go to 2022, you can see how big that gap is. And so I think the main point behind this chart is just to illustrate when we're talking about this issue, it's not a small segment of our population. It's really the majority of our workforce that we're talking about when you look at all the job groups that are represented here. And one job group is indicative of like hundreds of actual jobs. So everyone that we interact with on a daily basis is probably impacted some way, shape, or form by this issue. So here's another way to look at it. If you are someone who makes 150% of the area median income, so that's about $146,000 for a household of 3. The areas that are in blue, those are areas in our metropolitan area that you are able to afford to live in. So that means not spending more than 30% of your income on housing. You'll note if you go down to the median income, 100% of area median income, it's far more yellow. So more places that are unaffordable for residents who are in that income band. And then if you go down to 80% of the area median income, and I'll stay here just for a second, this is the threshold that the federal government indicates that if someone makes 80% of the area median income, they are considered low income. Anything below that is considered low income, and where you'll see dedicated affordable, whether that's single family housing or multifamily housing, that's who this is serving, people that earn below this threshold. Again, that's a lot of people who we rely on to make Richmond a great place. So if you go even further down to 50% of area median income, there's very few options. And again, there's still so many occupations that are within this income range. Now, what does this mean? Does this mean that people who are in this income level don't live in the region? No, obviously not. It means that they're paying upwards of 50, 60, 70% of their income on rent, which on a more personal level means that they're making monthly decisions between rent, groceries, and other critical needs, which is not sustainable, right? One life event away from being unstable and potentially homeless. So a lot of folks are living on the margins because of our high housing costs. So one of the things we'll talk about tonight during the conversation, and hopefully you can have a deep dive in it, it's important, zoning. I know it's not a sexy issue, it's not something that people don't really think about, but zoning is so essential to how housing gets built, where housing gets built. A great example of this, if you look at the jurisdictions here on the screen, Hanover County, Town of Ashland, Henrico, Chesterfield, the City of Richmond. All of those combined, just around 5% of the total land area allows for multifamily development. So I think a part of this conversation is to help dispel some of the misnomers that are out there. You see cranes everywhere in our region. You hear new development here, land bought here, and people think that there's more development happening than ever, and that's not really the case. Another example of that. Between 1983 and 2011 in Henrico County, there's a lot of land for use for single-family development. About 14,500 acres was used during that time period. So building hasn't returned to pre-recession levels. Much of the development in the 70s and 80s was at a far higher rate than what we see today. Another great example, Chesterfield County. So we're in Chesterfield today. I live in Chesterfield County, and I'll give you a great example of why zoning is important. So the minimum lot size for a single-family home in Chesterfield County is about 12,000 square feet. So for a lot of people, like, I'm not inclined in terms of numbers. That doesn't really mean anything if I didn't work in housing. So that's about the equivalent of 3 NBA basketball courts. So it's a pretty sizable lot, but that's the minimum lot that you're able to build on. I live in a neighborhood where all of the homes are between 8,000 and 9,000 square feet in terms of the lot size. That's a neighborhood that wouldn't be able to get built today. A lot of neighborhoods that many people occupy today, you wouldn't because of current zoning standards. And so I think when you're thinking about NIMBYism and some of the pushback around increased density, it's important to have some of this information available so that folks understand what they're actually pushing back against. So last thing I'll touch on, just demystifying some narratives around housing and affordable housing in particular. What does it look like? What are we talking about? People usually conjure up images of units that are of poor quality and developments that won't maintain their value over time. These are examples of affordable housing within our region that have been built recently. And I show these because it's important to note that the standards through which affordable developments have to go through are not the same standards that you do in a market rate development. The LIHTC, or Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program, is the main way affordable housing gets built in this country. There's a very thick book that a rule book that you have to adhere to just to be competitive for funding. This is an example. This is like literally 5% of some of the standards that you have to meet in terms of design and construction, just to be competitive to get funding. These are what these deals have to go through. And so when you think about, what does luxury mean and all these other things that you see in terms of marketing with new developments, a lot of people think that just because something is affordable, it's going to be of inferior quality, and that what gets funded is going to be of the utmost quality. So hopefully we can take a deeper dive into some of those conversations later tonight, and we'll talk about this further on the panel, but this was just to kind of serve as a foundation on what the landscape for housing looks like today. And what do we stand to gain? What do we stand to lose from this issue? This is a snapshot of evictions within Richmond. Richmond has very high eviction rates. That's not a secret. But I want to emphasize the public costs. The eviction lab here in Richmond that's housed in VCU, they did a study a few years ago that looked at what's the public cost to evictions. And if you combine the city of Richmond, Henrico, and Chesterfield in 2018, looking at all the evictions, the public cost was over $100 million, taking into account shelter costs and legal costs and sheriff's time going out carrying out evictions and foster care and the juvenile detention center. So all of those things go into housing instability. And so instead of paying for it downstream, we could invest upstream in preventative, which would be more cost effective in the long run. So thank you all for the time tonight, and I'm looking forward to having more fruitful discussions a little bit later on.
Come on up, panel. It is not Q&A right now. It's actually time for our panelists to come join while I introduce them all. All right, first we have Nick Feit. Nick Feit is a policy advisor and practitioner of housing and community development for Chesterfield County in the Department of Community Enhancement. That is long. He joined Chesterfield County in July of 2020 after more than a decade with the city of Richmond. He is currently working on a variety of housing and real estate development projects, many involving the reuse of existing buildings and spaces to meet future community needs. Renee has 35 years of experience in commercial real estate banking in various Virginia markets. Over the past 10 years, Renee has been active in the affordable housing space. Renee has resided in New Kent County for 13 years. Bernard's comprehensive background in planning, design, and construction informs his long-term and holistic development philosophy, which strives to create sustained economic and social opportunities for urban communities. Bernard is currently a partner at Lynx Ventures, an impact-focused for-profit commercial real estate development and investment firm based in Richmond. As a firm, they have a commitment to affordable housing and have developed over 500 units over the past 10 years, with a pipeline of approximately 1,200 affordable units they hope to have completed by 2027. And we have Scott. Scott's over here. Scott Andrews Breckerly is a Senior Community Impact Officer at the Community Foundation for Greater Richmond, serving as a staff lead for affordable housing, homelessness, and adult workforce development. To the work, he brings nearly a decade of direct service and program management experience as a master's level housing social worker in Richmond and New York City. Scott will be helping us this evening with collecting questions. And so he'll be walking around for the questions you put in your index cards, along with some other volunteers. After the panel discussion, we will have time for a Q&A with the audience. So while they're talking, please write your questions for the panel on the provided index cards, and Scott will come around to collect them throughout the discussion. Okay, are we ready? You all ready? Okay, let's get started with our panel. So the first question, Nick, I'm going to ask you. Why is affordable housing important for everyone? And more broadly, if I'm already housed, why might I care about my locality's housing policies?
All right, let's get it started with a softball. Javon's presentation was so good. And I just want to say, if I repeat that, it's because it's right. But housing affordability, and as it relates to economic mobility, you have to know that those two are very much linked. And there's lots of research that says the best way to promote economic mobility is for someone to have a stable unit. And really that word stable is what we're talking about. It's stability to go be the best worker, to go get the best out of your educational experience, to live in a way that you can be the healthiest that you can be. And when we don't have a stable housing option for our residents, to the degree that you can think that you are part of a community and that community is part of a county or city and a country, we are putting weak links in the chain when we don't need to do that. We can build a better, stronger way, and it's through this tool that we have called affordable housing, and we have to find paths to do that. And those paths are not, they're not monumental. A lot of them are where we've built obstructions to them, and so part of getting there is to, take those down or modify them, and they're marginal ways. They're not, 12-story buildings everywhere so that there's tons of housing. It's smaller than that. It's a granny flat. It's a 2 units where there was 1 and those kinds of things. If you were at the PHA event last year, Richard Kallenberg, who was an education researcher, came and he talked about how he got out of education research and he got into housing research because he found that money and educational programs and all kinds of innovative policy solutions did not promote education attainment as much as just students living in a quality neighborhood in stable housing. And so we've got to kind of pivot that way, and we very much can do that. And you guys are all part of that.
Thank you. I think the key word I heard there is stability. Having taught for 20-something years, for a kid to be able to go home to a stable home, to have a home to go to, if they don't have that, nothing else really matters on what you do. Thank you for that insight. Bernard, I'm going to ask you the next question. Okay. What are some of the factors that contribute to the cost of housing and subsequent affordability? Can the community do anything to help?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest things just to understand is, when I moved to Richmond 8.5 years ago, we could build, multifamily units for like $120,000 a unit, which, today those numbers are usually over $200,000 a unit. So the increased costs of just building things, in addition to the macro climate of just increased interest rates and just all of that stuff, really makes it difficult to build product quickly. And as Javon kind of alluded to, the low-income housing tax credit program is extremely complex. So these aren't just straightforward projects where we go raise some equity and we get a bank loan and we build the project. The drawings have to get reviewed. We have to go through all sorts of operating agreements and all sorts of other requirements to be able to build the unit. So from our perspective, what helps that a lot is inserting predictability in the process where you can. So to the extent land is already rezoned or there's policies in place that allow us to have to do things faster is always helpful. But the reality of these things is everybody, we've got our own kind of issues we're trying to work through. The city or county has its own objectives that they're trying to solve for. Our bank has their own objectives they're trying to solve for. So there's the community piece on top of that too, if we're trying to build a project that's going to have some sort of community impact. So it's a very complex kind of Rubik's Cube of things that we're trying to achieve. And I think it gets lost on people more broadly that, developers are just building stuff and they're making all this money. Well, the reality is it's like these things are, especially when it comes to affordable housing, are just very, very complex. And making sure that everyone has access to the correct information, which is why PHA is so valuable from a regional perspective, is providing the data that has been researched that people can stand behind and say, here's the numbers, here's what's happening. And to the extent that from a community perspective, you can take that information and then go to your supervisors or your council members or other stakeholders and actually say, hey, we care about these things and we want to make sure we can be proactive in trying to get projects built.
Yeah, no, I would add on to there. Bernard's talking about rental property. Some of the for sale housing could be, some of the costs of that could be lowered if we allowed more density, smaller parcels of land, like Javon was talking about, changing the minimum lot size, allowing more multifamily development. And then some of the times when developers are trying to get approvals for their projects, the municipalities will like to see a lot of pretty things on the outside to make it look very aesthetically pleasing, but all those things just add to the cost and not really the functionality of the property. I know we all want things to look attractive, but just remember that every time you ask for, some stone down at the bottom or something like that, it's just adding to the cost, which has to then be passed along to whoever that homeowner is.
Thank you. It's just always interesting when you're trying to do good, how much more complicated it is, right? To do what we know is right for humankind, it takes a lot more effort. I really wish it was different. My next question. Most people would agree that explicitly race-based zoning restrictions and covenants are wrong and extreme examples of exclusionary zoning. Redlining is a term you may be more familiar with. But present day, there are more subtle examples of exclusionary practices that can contribute to our existing disparities. What are some examples of zoning or land use restrictions that make it more challenging for housing that serves low incomes to get approved? Javon, can you start us with this one?
So I mentioned a few during my presentation about lot sizes and also, density in terms of how many units per acre that you're able to build. Obviously, if you just look at a lot size, for example, the larger the lot, the larger the home, you're limiting who's going to be able to buy there, which will then ultimately impact what your school districts look like and what students are able to attend. And if that's going to skew families that have higher incomes, then you're going to see some of the disparities that we see in our communities. And that's no secret, and that's not exclusive to today. That's been going on for quite some time in different capacities. So I think it's just important to be intentional about some of those things. And there's been a lot of communities that have done things related to zoning and land use in order to ensure that you have what they call more diverse housing options, throughout. If you're redoing your zoning code and you allow for density in areas that you wouldn't previously have allowed for. If you look at your commercial corridors and you allow for more residential use and mixed use opportunities, a lot of that is happening in our region. I think that the next step is how we can incentivize affordability to be prioritized throughout that process. So zoning is, as I said, it's incredibly important to what's able to get built, and it also is something that can be really influenced by citizens. So if you're in a locality that's going through a zoning code update, there's an opportunity. No. There's an opportunity to insert yourself in that process and advocate for more diverse housing options, whether that be multifamily or single family, whether that be townhomes or in commercial areas allowing more residential uses. That's something that citizens can really have a big influence on at the local level. Most of these housing and land use decisions are going to get made at the local level. I know we'll talk about Dillon Rule a little bit later on. But yeah, and Nick, maybe you can add on to this from a local government perspective.
Sure, as the representative for all 10 municipal governments, one thing I just want to say, local government, we are carrying out the things that you want your government to do. And so when it comes to zoning, the zoning code very much reflects our constituency, and to the degree that we have to have changes and updates into that periodically, it's a real opportunity to get in there and have a conversation with your neighbors and yourselves and your families and staff. There are several public meetings where I've been to, and unfortunately there's like more staff than there are you guys, and we get really lonely and we want to hear from you, not just on Facebook. So you got to get in there and be involved with that process. And then zoning means that someone like Bernard can look at that and say, do I want to risk X million dollars on building this thing? So we have this second part, right, where we've made it possible to do the thing, but then we also have to have someone being willing to build it. And zoning code changes that are that allow for more creativity, I think, can help that second part, which is actually getting things built. But again, when we're talking about zoning changes, as has been alluded to here, it's not that Oklahoma skyscraper that's supposed to be the tallest building ever in your residential neighborhood. We're not talking about that. We're talking about, hey, we have this road. It has 6 lanes on it. There are sidewalks already there. It has a water main that's big enough to be a ride at Water Country USA. This is where we might want to add housing because it will be less expensive to do it. There are ways for people to use transit. It'll cost less to live there in real terms. And there's affordability in both what we build and who lives in it, but there's also affordability in what it costs to live there, and there's affordability what it costs to maintain it. And those are other vectors we really got to consider in this broader debate about or discussion about housing affordability. I mean, it looks we need all those things, right? You saw the chart, right? We're up to here with housing prices, and there's not very many people on this side who are making the income to afford rent in a home.
Yeah, there was mention earlier, I believe, Javon, you mentioned the Dillon rule. Would anyone like to talk a little bit more about that?
Well,
I don't know. Did I just lay a bomb? I'm sorry.
I mentioned it, so I'll start since I mentioned it. So yeah, in Virginia, where Dillon rule states, I mean, that means if a local jurisdiction wants to do something that's not allowed by the state code, you have to get approval by the state legislature before you can do that at the local level. So for example, something we hear all the time in kind of settings like this, and understandably, you know, why can't this local government just require that every unit has a certain level of affordable units in it? Easy. Well, that's not allowed by the state of Virginia, so it would have to go through General Assembly. That would have to get approved. So there are a few local jurisdictions in Virginia that have exemptions from that, and most of them are Northern Virginia. They're able to require that, but because of the Dillon rule, you have to work with the state legislature if there's something that you want to do at the local level that's not already allowed by the state. So.
And it's just one thing I'd add to Javon's point is, you know, when we like trying to be, it's probably to a fault, overly creative to doing things. But what that sometimes creates is when you have, you know, stakeholders like the city or the county that actually wants to help, but then there's a layer of kind of relationship and navigating kind of state politics also. So you kind of get multiple layers of trying to solve everyone's problems that can kind of slow things down. But we've seen, just in our experience, there's so much interest around trying to solve the problem of housing that there's been, from a local and statewide, like even people that are on different sides of things, like agree it's an issue because it's very much about economic development and creating more jobs and better wages and opportunities. That there's been a lot of things that have actually gotten done that I think is encouraging from a policy perspective that can help with the production of more units.
Thank you. Thank you for tackling that. We're going to move on now to the Q&A session. I'll grab some index cards from Scott. Okay. What's the need in forms of units by area, and what's the gap? No, what's the need in terms of units by area? What's the gap?
So the region-wide gap is about 40,000 units. I think that number is less important than just the need to invest more locally and the need to, just increase supply from the local levers that we have. I think sometimes with housing, the issue is that we think about the needs and too much, and it becomes overwhelming and daunting, and it discourages people from being involved in the process. And we also don't talk about some of the things that we do well. And I see Kelly here, and so I'll just note that there's a lot of things that we do very well from a system standpoint, compared to a lot of other places in the country, right? Like we have one of the lower homeless rates per capita. And what that means is it's a pretty solvable issue if we work together and invest in it to the level that we should. And I think the same goes with housing. We're not at the point of other places across the country or even in the state where it's like $500,000 per unit to build, or where there's literally a 1 million unit gap. It's still pretty attainable here in Richmond, but we have to act now if we're going to have an impact before our growth becomes unattainable.
Thank you.
And I don't think it's just about the numbers also. It has to be a wide variety and a diversity in those housing options, both rental and for sale, in in different price ranges. So, serving very low income, serving the 30%, the 50%, the 80%, the 120% AMI. There are housing needs at all of those levels.
All right. Okay. Homelessness and affordable housing are often treated as if they are separate systems. Yet, pressure on part of the system causes pressure in the other. What regional housing affordability intervention would most directly help people experiencing homelessness?
I can touch on that as well. So the number one solution to homelessness is housing, plain and simple.
You can clap.
So, and this goes back to thinking upstream. So if you are going to invest in an issue, right, you don't invest in the intervention, you invest in the long-term solution. The way that I always like to think of it is kind of like a highway. So if, someone is trying to get home and get to their destination, they get on the interstate because it's a conduit for doing that incredibly efficiently. And then you get on the on-ramp and there's already traffic. If you were to just add another lane, that's not the problem if there's only one exit from that highway. So if you compare that to homelessness, if we don't have enough exits to permanent housing, and we have a lot of people that are funneled into shelter, for example, on that highway, they're just sitting there, that means the longer they're sitting in shelter, and the whole purpose is to have that be a brief, dignified intervention, so they can be on their way to housing, so that people who are on the streets who are in danger of falling into homelessness, they can quickly get into shelter, get on the highway, and then get out. So you have to increase the number of exits, and that is housing.
I love that metaphor. Yeah. We ready for the next question?
Yeah, I would just expand upon that analogy. And there was a book written called Bottlenecks quite a long time ago, but it was about opportunity. And one of the things the researcher wrote about was just access to housing is a bottleneck. Like, we have a way of getting rid of the limited supply and expanding the number of things. And, to kind of use your analogy there of the exit, like, if we made it more possible to get through that bottleneck, more people can get to the stability and get to a, not needing affordable housing and moving on with themselves. And in some ways, tautologies are great if you don't really want to say anything, but, more affordable housing can help you need less of it overall as people are able to do what we're all here to hear about, which is rise economically.
Thank you. One significant challenge any developer faces is the upfront cost of acquiring land. Is there movement around something like a land acquisition fund that developers could draw on to access capital quickly and defray this upfront cost? We have about 5 minutes.
I haven't heard of that movement, but I have heard that there are, there is a movement for municipalities to look at maybe some of their excess land, at some of their, maybe some of the schools have excess land that could be built on. There are a lot of churches out there that are being underutilized that have a lot of excess land. Those are options. It's not really a fund. I think those are probably just one-off things that need to be that looked at individually.
Yeah, I guess just one thing to piggyback on that. It's like I don't think there's a specific fund that's been set up. But what I will say, kind of to the point around people working together to trying to solve problems differently, is that there are different constituencies of people thinking about how they can contribute to solving the problem. So whether that's a church or whether that's a family that's owned land that's over generations somewhere that someone decides they want to contribute it or donate it to a nonprofit, whatever it may be. I think people are thinking more about just kind of the purpose of tonight is like what role as individually can you play in trying to move these things forward. And there's a lot of different ways and there's a lot of different groups that you can support. So.
Yeah, and that's a really good segue into what may be our last question based on time. So home ownership is my primary wealth building vehicle, and yet I'm broadly supportive of affordable housing. How can I best protect my investment and the equity I've built while being a good community member?
It's not a zero-sum game, and there's plenty of people who will say, if you look at home prices and real estate prices near affordable housing, they do not go down. Often affordable housing is a stabilizing effect on the local real estate market. But that is a dynamic in the United States, which is a lot of people's savings is tied up in real estate. And, we've got to get that message out there that, it's not a threat. And, don't, to the, the gym where I work out has HGTV on all day long, and I can't hear what is going on, but people, I can see them agonizing over shower heads, and I think that's the wrong way to live. We've got to think about things a little more broadly, and hopefully we can just keep having that conversation.
I think one thing to that, I think historically when people think of affordable housing, they think of these towers in New York with like small windows that don't look great. When the reality is, like from our perspective, like we build our affordable housing just like it's market rate housing. So if you were to go tour one of our affordable housing developments, like you would drive past it and not think that it's affordable housing. So I think some of this too is going to actually look at product of people that are building affordable housing in the region, because I think generally speaking, everyone's building a quality of housing that I think people would be proud to have in their neighborhood. I think it's just an awareness of getting people out to go tour those things.
Yeah, I mean, to Nick's point, there have been numerous studies to show that neighborhoods that are located in close proximity to affordable housing properties, their home values don't go down. That's largely been ineffective to deterring NIMBYism and opposition to those kinds of developments, though. So it's not for lack of information. It's not for we don't know what the impact will be. So that's why it's important to have folks like you all who care about this issue, who can be ambassadors in your own communities, in your own circles, to make sure that folks know that this is a need for all of us, like that the people that we interact with require, this housing, and no one prevented you from moving into your neighborhood, so why should, someone else stand in the way of someone from moving into theirs, so.
Well, that is a great way to end our panel discussion. Thank you so much. So panel, you can come on down while I get ready to introduce our next speaker. Thank you all so much. Round of applause, please. And if you're like me, I did not know what NIMBYism was before the panel. So I'm just going to say it, because the teacher and me, I'm just going to say it. Not in my backyard. It's an acronym for not in my backyard. I saw it and I was like, I don't know what that means. So I'm just assuming other people are like me and didn't know what it means. All right. After many years as a nonprofit executive, Veronica Fleming founded Veronica Fleming Consulting and serves as a partner with Community Engagement and Charette Associates. She provides interim executive leadership for nonprofits, executive coaching, fundraising, strategic planning, group facilitation, and is a career community engagement professional. After Veronica's presentation and the table discussions, we will have time for another Q&A session with Veronica joining the panel. Please write your questions on index cards throughout her presentation, and if anything comes to the surface during your table discussions. Welcome, Veronica.
Thank you, Erica, and thank you guys on the panel for a really great discussion. I thought it was a very kind of clear, understandable way of understanding the broader picture of what's going on in housing in the region. And so my job tonight is to talk to you about the regional framework. And it's the Regional Economic Upward Mobility Framework. And so when you think about housing, it's important to understand that it is core to economic upward mobility. And it is part of a larger context of what needs to happen in order to ensure that there's upward economic mobility for all in the region. And so around 2022, the Chamber of Commerce, Plan RVA, and the Community Foundation convened the Economic Upward Mobility Work Group Framework process. And this happened kind of in 2022 as a result of, I think, of a visit to Charlotte, direct result of a visit to Charlotte. But there were many more visits prior to that where our community was really looking at how we can balance economic mobility for the least of us in our community. And also there was an event that maybe many of you all attended where Raj Chetty was invited to the community to talk about ways that he, as a Harvard professor, was looking at economic mobility over many years. And so the slide that you see in front of you really kind of indicates the areas currently covered by the Economic Upward Mobility Framework. It is 9 jurisdictions, so this is not small potatoes. It is comprehensive, and it is heavy lifting. Next slide. Wait a minute. Yes, can you do the slides for me? I'm going to do this. Thank you. As Javon indicated, the region really does have a lot of wealth. And if you just look at those issues, you understand that the region is probably doing well in many areas. But not everybody is benefiting from that wealth. And that's what we want to talk about. Many folk still face challenges. Many people of color have still disproportionately experienced barriers to prosperity, and it continues to be the case relative to income. One of the things that we need to think about in terms of addressing that is that it's important to embrace the fact that no one needs to be left behind. It's not about whether, some folks, we can just do with that. No one needs to be left behind with the kind of wealth and intellectual capital that we have in this community. So it's important for us to think about embracing some values that we've accepted and adopted in this process. Opportunity-rich and inclusive neighborhoods, you'll see that throughout this presentation. High-quality education, rewarding work, healthy environments and access to good health care, responsive and just governance, not only for other generations, but for this generation, for our generation. Next slide. And so as we think about the vision for initiating this change, we think about it in terms of establishing leadership and buy-in for this change, for this process, encouraging the community to continue to provide input into priorities. My job in this initiative is community engagement. And so educating the community, but also engaging the community, and not just hearing about it and sitting at the table, but really informing the process and helping to guide the process, helping to lead the process, and hold the process accountable. We're going to explore areas that help us focus on some key strategies that we have learned over time. If you focus on certain key strategies, you will see economic mobility happen in your community. The accountability structure is something that we're working on and that we will establish. It needs to be built into the process over time. And we need to engage as many advocates as possible. So when I think about what you all are charged to do as participants in this initiative, advocating for the kinds of things that will make system changes that Javon and Bernard and others on the panel talked about are really, really critical to the success of this process. So next slide. The guiding principles that reflect our commitment to this process are on the screen. Collaborative leadership with intentional diversity. A national partnership that informs and sustains what we do, and that will help us develop the strategies. Community engagement embedded at every level. People get tired of me talking about it, but it has to be a way we think about this, not just something we do as an afterthought. It has to be embedded. Action-oriented approach. I remember when I started this work, it's like, what has to be different about this process? We have to do something and stop talking about it. We have to kill something and eat it, somebody said to me. Long-term commitment to sustain these efforts over a 10 to 20-year period. Often we don't have the patience to understand and participate and stay the course. But these guiding principles, I think, will help us get very serious about the process. And we, as we work the initiative, we have to understand what is it going to take for the corporate community, the business community, for local government, through elections and all of the changes that we have to undertake. What is it going to take for them to be committed long-term to this process? We're not alone, as I was talking about the fact that we are looking at, next slide. We are engaged in national partnerships. The examples of Kansas City Rising are examples that we've looked at. The examples of Charlotte, North Carolina are also examples of communities that we've looked at. Next slide. Importantly, we have begun to really listen deeply to our community in terms of how we move forward in this process. It really is not true that folks who do this work always know the right way, the right things to do. The community has to inform every aspect of this process. Every level of the community has to inform this process. And so there is significant input and feedback that is required throughout the process. So Chamber RVA, Plan RVA, the Community Foundation, United Way, Richmond Memorial Health Foundation, the Community Foundation, are groups that have committed resources to ensure that there is intensive ongoing engagement in this process. Next slide. So this is a slide we've shared before, and not everybody likes this slide because it's people stacked on top of each other, but that's not really what it is. This feels to me like building blocks to engagement. This is an approach that we are thinking of and that we are operating in terms of how we reach out to audiences who we need to hear from, who need to be engaged in, who need to be a part of the leadership and the implementation of this process. So we're listening to each of these groups. We've implemented key informant surveys. We've talked to individuals and representatives from each of these groups so far. It's not comprehensive. We've just begun the process. We've just begun. And community engagement will happen throughout the entire process. It just has to be effective and intentional, and it is hard. It is hard. And in order for it to be done at all, it has to be done intentionally. What's the language? With fierce intentionality. Fierce intentionality. You have to do it, however hard and painful it is. Otherwise, it will fall apart. The community will not commit to it. So our engagement has included Black people, white people, immigrants, indigenous groups, people with differing abilities. And we need to continue to hear from you about groups that may well be missing from this process. So interestingly, we have just started this really intensive engagement process, but I think when I took this job, someone said to me, well, Veronica, we need you to do about 20,000 surveys. And it's like, no. But what we did do was really take a step back and look at, well, so what has been done? And now what do we need to do? We listened to many of you in the nonprofit community. We listened to many of you in neighborhoods and said, we have been surveyed enough, because this, by the way, is in the wake of COVID. And during COVID, we surveyed people to death. And so people don't want to sit through more surveys. They don't want to sit through more focus groups telling us what they need, because they've told us. And so one of the first things that we want to do is to say to people, we've heard you. So the next slide, please. So one of the first things that we did was to partner with SIR and ask many of you to send us copies of the surveys and the research that has already been done. And so they did a bit of an analysis of those studies. We received about 60 or 70 reports, but this slide kind of indicates where some of those reports came from municipal planning documents, housing organizations, vulnerable populations, business environment, education, travel and tourism, neighborhood development, funders, healthcare. And we're not done collecting information, but we do have a beginning of an analysis of things that we need to consider, that certainly Jovan in the Partnership for Housing Affordability, that network, as they begin to stand up that work, things that they need to consider as they do this work. Next slide. The other input came from SIR's work as it did a statewide assessment of civic engagement. What are the kinds of things that people are really interested in? And you'll see in Central Virginia, that purple column there, 53% of folks are interested in education, 50% in health and well-being, 39% in housing, 35% in public safety, et cetera, et cetera. And so this tells us, and it tells those who are standing up, the priority areas, that these areas are important to those who are engaged in civic life of the community. Next slide. So some of the key takeaways, some of the key things that we heard are things that are probably not new to you. We heard that organizations want to improve equity, inclusion, opportunity, quality of life. No matter what you have heard, the organizations doing this work on the ground know that it's important. That the efforts and issues by sector or topic do cut across geographic boundaries and require collaboration. And I am grateful to see the kind of collaboration that we're seeing across regions in this work. Municipality efforts, the issue is the same. There's increasing attention needed to the aging population. And education, housing, transportation are top concerns across the region, but safety is a daily concern for higher need and marginalized communities. It was not in the first list, but it is indeed a higher concern for the communities that we need to target if in fact we're going to see economic mobility happen in this community. So reports are still coming in, and what I want to do is encourage those of you who have not sent information to us at the Community Foundation and our other partners to continue doing that. We continue to need to hear the voices that are provided by the community. We're continuing to do some different kinds of things, and we are asking questions. We still need to go back to the community and say, by the way, we heard you. This is what you said. Is this still true? As true as it was 4 or 5 years ago? Are there voices that were missing when this information came to us? Are there people that were missing at the table? Are the issues still relevant? And how can we work together to continue to engage meaningful voices in our community? Next slide. This is not a surprise. It's similar to the slide that Jovan shared. This is not news to us in this work. People of color are still earning less in our region, and you can see that. I can't see anything up here. That 87%, 87,000 is the median income of whites, 52,000 the median income of blacks, 59,000 the median incomes of our Hispanic Latinx communities, and 97,000 Asian communities. Just disproportionately, these issues impact the Black and Latino communities. Next slide. I guess another way to look at the slide that Jovan shared is that as you look at the red in the slide here, this is the Richmond region, that in fact zip codes should not determine our economic success, but in fact they do. If you are born in one of these communities in the red, the chances are that without appropriate, just, equitable interventions, support, you will remain in these communities, and that you will earn less than your parents. And that if you live there now, you earn less than your parents did years ago, 25 years ago. So, next slide, please. So, we have adopted the Urban Institute framework as a strategy to move forward. The Urban Institute and their upward economic mobility strategy has a basic framework that we have adopted for this initiative. They have been putting this into practice for more than 60 years. And we are looking to locally create and replicate strategies that they've implemented and adapt them to the realities of our region. They are a powerful voice and a powerful resource for us. And we have, I believe it's a data group that we're working with. There are various educational groups that we are sitting down at the table with, but they are helping to guide and support and lead the process, support the process that we're engaged in here in Richmond. One of the things that we want to do as we move forward in this initiative is adopt the Urban Institute's strategy for community engagement, and I'll talk briefly about that for 2 seconds. So, next slide. The Urban Institute approach centers these values: economic mobility, power and autonomy, dignity and belonging. And I heard you talk about belonging is one of the strategies, one of the things that your company works on. How many of us actually think about dignity and belonging in the work that we do? It's core to economic mobility in our communities. There are 5 pillar icons in here in this strategy that you can see on the slide: opportunity-rich and inclusive neighborhoods, high-quality education, rewarding work, healthy environment, responsive and just government. Next slide. So digging a little deeper in those areas, you think about housing stability, opportunity-rich neighborhoods. We are talking about housing stability. We're talking about racial diversity in our neighborhoods. We're talking about social capital, transportation access. High-quality education, that area, we're talking about access to quality preschool or preschool at all. We're talking about school economic diversity. We're talking about preparation for college, digital access. Healthy environment, neonatal health care, environmental quality, safety from trauma, responsive and just government, political participation, just policing, rewarding work. We're talking about jobs that pay a living wage. When you have some time, take a look at these key areas, because these are the key areas that we're working on and focusing on in this initiative. Okay, next slide. So we're asking you to join us basically in this process. We have a website that is being set up. We are asking you to engage with us in this process and lend your ideas and your time and your resources. Next slide. So we are getting ready to engage in a tabletop discussion, and before we kind of go into the questions, I want to just kind of set this context, because these particular questions that we're asking you, we will ask throughout this initiative. We will continue to ask, how can we do this best? We will continue to ask you to provide guidance and input into this process. And so, do you want me to read the questions? Okay, I'll do that. Here's the question, and you've got a facilitator at each table, I think. So what do you think needs to be in place for this initiative to be successful? And what's important about this question is that many of us have participated in these big initiatives before. What has to be in place? What has to be different for this initiative to be successful? And then, what has to happen in order for you, your organization, and community, in the context of this initiative, to address housing needs as they were identified by Jovan and the panel a little earlier? What is it going to take for us to do this work? Okay. All right.
Thank you so much, Veronica. Hope you're all like me. The neurons, new paths are being made because I'm learning lots of new information. Before you get to your table discussion, we're going to go over group norms. One is to speak from the I perspective. No one person can speak for an entire group of people. The second is to treat the candidness of others as a gift and honor confidentiality. So what we don't want to happen is someone gets blasted on Facebook because you didn't like what they said. We don't do that. You might not like what you learned or what you heard, but that's okay. But we're not blasting people. Have fun when it is appropriate, and respect the need for serious conversation. Laughter is okay if it's the right time for laughter, okay? Assume good intentions, but also be aware of your impact. Be open-minded, and share the space. We only have 12 minutes for a table discussion, okay? So whatever you say needs to be clear and concise so that other people can also speak if they'd like. So 12 minutes, you'll have facilitators at your table. They will take notes, and you can also write questions on the what are they called? Index cards. All right, thank you. 1 minute left to wrap up your table discussion. Volunteers will be coming around to collect your index cards with questions. Okay. Oh, you want to come back up to the table? Oh, my pee. All right, so if we can go ahead and get started, we're going to continue with the Q&A session portion. All right, so I'll just say as a teacher, I was always happy when my students wouldn't stop talking, but I was also always worried, like, are you actually talking about what you were supposed to be talking about? So I'm going to assume you all were. You were having great conversation. Hopefully you met some new people today you want to stay in touch with. Oh. All right, and just to be fully transparent, because we started late, we're going to go a little bit over today, maybe 15 minutes. Otherwise, we'd have to cut the Q&A portion. If you have to go, 100% we understand, okay? No one will be offended. So rather than end at 7, we're looking at ending around 7:15, okay? Like I said, I believe in the power of your own 2 feet. You have to take care of yourself. People have responsibilities and things, okay? So let's get started. Start with these?
Sure, I think those are relatively quick.
Okay, this is a question for Bernard. Are you ready? Have you used the city's Affordable Housing Trust Fund in any of your projects? And if so, what has been your experience?
I don't.
Yes.
Yes, we.
I'm on the affordable housing.
Oh, actually, yes, we have. I'm trying to think through. So our experience has been great, to be honest. I think there's what we have found in our experience from working with the city is that they've been pretty proactive in housing I think the administration set like a 10,000 unit goal of trying to bring units to the market. So in that regard, they've been very great to work with. As I said before, these projects are usually pretty complicated, so when things come up, they usually are there to help us figure out ways to creatively solve them so we can keep building our projects. So.
All right, thank you. Folks likely don't show up to zoning meetings because they don't understand zoning laws. What models, resources exist to effectively educate residents on zoning laws so they can act as informed advocates for change?
I'm not a planner, and I'll just say it is complicated. There are a couple great books regarding density. One is called Visualizing Density, and I believe you can download it for free on the internet, and it just shows you what does 1 unit an acre look like, what does 5 unit an acre look like, and that can be really helpful for, visualizing what the zoning code might say. But yeah, it is complicated.
Another tool so it doesn't exist for the Richmond area yet, but it will be here in the fall. There's a great organization, Housing Forward Virginia. They have something called the Zoning Atlas that they've done for Hampton Roads, and they just unveiled for Northern Virginia a few weeks ago. They'll have that for the Richmond region later this fall, but it's online, interactive, where you can zoom in and go see what the zoning is in your neighborhood and where other places and how things are zoned across the region. And then also, if you look at Like, for example, the city's master plan. I mean, that's a great way to look at Richmond 300 to see, you know, where growth nodes are, where the city's planning to do things in terms of commercial development or residential development or transportation, and how zoning comes to play in all of that. So I would recommend those two tools.
I'll just add that I don't think you need to be a zoning expert to show up at a meeting, at a rezoning meeting hearing, to be an advocate for housing. I would just show up and voice your opinion and not worry about all the technicalities.
Yeah, and I think, and Renee, you have an interesting story to share about your experience. Would you mind sharing a little bit about that now?
Sure. So I'm a resident of New Kent County, and I've lived there on and off for 13 years. I have not really engaged with the community. I've been very active in commercial real estate banking. I'm active in the industry, but did not know any of the didn't know any of my elected officials in the county and how the county worked, really. So there was a rezoning case recently that got denied, and I didn't really understand why it got denied. It looked like it was consistent with the county's comprehensive plan, and I guess that just stirred something in me to just be more vocal about how I felt about it. So I wrote a couple of emails to the Board of Supervisors. I didn't even know who they all were, so I had to look them up and kind of sent that off. And that started this journey of just trying to get more engaged and involved. And right before I came here, I went to a housing advisory meeting that was open to the public, not on the committee, but I'm going to try to stay involved as an active participant. So.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. And what I'm hearing is oh yes, Veronica.
Erica, I just wanted to address that quickly too. I think that from the perspective of engaging community and understanding zoning, you're going to get folks who will never show up to a zoning meeting, right, or show up to a conversation about changing a street or whatever in their neighborhood, but they might come to a civic association meeting or a church group, and the effort to translate zoning language so that those of us who are working in community can help regular folks understand zoning issues would be kind of awesome. And so I would suggest that that's a strategy we might look at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you don't have to be an expert, but a little bit of work, bringing a friend along, it's going to go a long way. All right, so here's our next. Are we ready for our next question? Okay. Petersburg and Tri-Cities is considered part of the Richmond Regional MSA. Why isn't this area included in this discussion? Many resources are allocated based on MSA data. Oh, you don't want to answer it? Okay, I was like, well, are we doing that?
No, so I'm actually looking at some of the leaders of the Framework Initiative and would defer to them to address some of that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Don't worry if you're in the Crater Planning District Commission, because they are also trying to plan a fun and exciting housing summit for this fall, and they're pretty fired up about it. The Cameron Foundation's pretty fired up about it. So I think something very similar will be coming there, and so don't worry.
All right, thank you. Thank you. And so in case everyone couldn't hear us, because we're basing it on plan, the short answer is we're basing it on Plan RVA with the future goal of incorporating Petersburg and the Tri-Cities area later. Is that a good synopsis? Okay. And then panel, if you could kind of repeat the question after I ask it so that they can capture it. All right, this one's a long one, so testing your memory here. How do we get to a place where new projects include both affordable and market? That says rate. Okay, I'm going to start over. How do we get to a place where new projects include both affordable and market rate housing to encourage mixed income neighborhoods, incentives versus mindsets? Let me say it again.
No.
No, okay.
I mean, I think Virginia Housing has a program, right, for mixed income housing. It's the 80-20. I don't know if you guys have done any of that or how often that gets done, but I know that is one method of doing that.
So as a reminder, you can do incentives. You can't require someone to include it even with those incentives. So all of this would have to be voluntary at the local level. There's things you can do like a density bonus. You could waive certain fees. So I'll speak from a specific example. Some of you may have seen that Henrico announced a new housing fund a few weeks ago. But on top of that was incentives included with that fund. So anyone who agrees to build units as a part of that, they will get their permitting fees waived. They will get water and sewer connection fees waived. They will have their plans expedited in the review process. So basically incentives for for-profit builders to get involved with affordable development. So those are things that local governments have the ability to do now. Again, can't require it, but if you layer a few incentives onto a development, it may make it feasible to have some units of affordability where that otherwise wouldn't have been possible, and maybe you can talk about how that works.
Yeah, it's just one thing I would say is that I think the intent of these things is great. The reality of these things is when we have projects and we go to get them financed, there's all sorts of layers and complexity that comes with that. So we may want to do something, but we may have to pivot to do something different to be able to have a project that we can actually build. So another example of that would be, it's great, the city of Richmond removed parking requirements. Phenomenal, but the reality is every project we're building still has one-to-one parking because that's what's sometimes required from a financing, or I shouldn't say sometimes, that's usually what's required from a financing perspective. So, the intent of these things is great because we want people walking, we want less cars, but, we still have to build stuff. Like we're in the business of building things, whether you're a for-profit or nonprofit. So sometimes you've got to do things that are not maybe ideal, but let's say not making the perfect enemy of the good, as they say. It's like, well, this isn't everything that we'd want to build, but it's 75% of it, so we're going to build 75% of it so we can start moving some things forward.
So I think the most effective way to address that is to have it be consistent. So if you put together a package of incentives, if you're a locality and developers know if they want to provide affordability, here's what I can get. And I get more incentives if I provide more affordable units, or I get more incentives if I provide units that are at a lower income level. So as opposed to being one-offs and just kind of deals with this developer here, this developer there, if you put something together that is formulaic and people know what it is, you'll probably get better results.
Okay. I'm going to our last question for the evening, and that is, given all the demands on an individual during their day, what are some ways that our citizens can be supportive of affordable and other housing efforts in their locality? So what is an action that people can take?
I would say speak up, voice your opinion, get as many recruit as many friends and family to also get involved. It oftentimes what happens at these hearings is that the opponents for a project will show up in full force, and that the supporters of affordable housing or any kind of housing development really don't show up. And so I think it's part of our responsibility to make sure that everybody knows how important it is and to show up and speak our voice.
I would just say that so much of the reason that people don't get engaged is they don't know how, and they are afraid to. They don't know who to reach out to. But there are resources, and some of them are, those that you wouldn't think about. It's important to approach your faith community. It's important to approach your social worker, your employer. Because one of the most important things for us to look at is how employers are actually providing supportive services to their workers. Where do they live? Do they have childcare? How are they getting to work? I mean, those kinds of things. So things that you might not normally think about as a way to have an impact on housing are just things that you do every day. Just think about reaching out to folks that you connect with every day. And I think a part of our job is to help folks understand that that is a way to do it. We need to educate and engage folks.
So there's some groups here in the region, sorry to introduce another acronym, but I will explain it this time. So as opposed to NIMBY, there's a YIMBY group here, Yes in My Backyard, that started up, I want to say last year, and they've been growing in their membership, and they have meetings at different breweries and other places in the community, sometimes on weekends, sometimes in the evenings, but they're incredibly good during the General Assembly session, letting you know like what bills there are related to housing that you can be supportive of and how to reach out to your state legislators. There's also organizations like Virginia Housing Alliance. They have lobbyists that are down at the General Assembly every year working on a housing agenda to get passed things like increasing money for our state's housing trust fund, or to get a state voucher program to match with vouchers at the local level. So I would say get embedded with groups that already exist.
Mm-hmm. I would say, and I know a lot of you in here work for nonprofits, but you should get to know them, go see the things that they do, go talk to the people that they house and they help. And it's going to become so much more real that there is a way to make progress on these challenges. And you're going to be blown away by what people are dedicating their lives to. Every time I talk to the partners, I'm always amazed that there are people who just do these things. They have like limitless empathy, and it's incredible. So it's not bleak. We are, a long time in getting to this point, but we will get out of it. And there are several of those people who are going to get us out of there are in this room right now. The other thing I would say is, talk to me and my counterparts in local government. We have email addresses, we have phone numbers. People have them, they call us, they talk to us. Have a conversation with us that is, not just when you're upset, but like, what do you think about this idea? And that really helps us get more data points on where people are in our community. Outreach, I'm not that old, but I've been in local government for a while, and it's so hard to get people out to do things. I don't know what has changed. Social media, the pandemic, better streaming shows. Like, we just don't do it like we used to. And, if you can help us with that, and especially around this topic or any topic that involves your community, that is huge. I mean, it just gives us a better perspective that is more holistic. And then we know the right direction to go because we have more input in that.
Was that everyone? We can't take questions. However, I've got a good announcement that you're going to like, I think. So hold on one second. Okay. All right. So thank you all. So on your tables, you'll see a QR code. As Veronica mentioned earlier, people don't like being surveyed to death, but they don't mind doing surveys if they know it's going to have an impact. This survey will have an impact and help us to make the next community conversation better, so we'd appreciate you filling out that survey. Promise it will be looked at, okay? Mark your calendars. The next Civic conversation will take place on September 18th, and the topic will be preparing workers for an equitable and resilient labor market. More information to come. Thank you to our panel. They will be around for about 15 minutes to answer any questions that you have. That was the good news I hope you were looking for. That you can come speak to the panel for about 15 minutes. We do ask that if there are people waiting to speak, that once again you share the space and don't use all their time so they can get to more people. Thank you all for attending, engaging in thoughtful conversations, providing your input, and for learning about how you can take action. Thank you to RVA Engage for sponsoring this event, and a big shout out to VPM for hosting us this evening and recording this session. Nice. All right, thank you all. Drive home safely.